In this lecture, we're going to finish unwrapping our gun and complete the project by setting up our texture atlas. We've already unwrapped the two sights and the trigger, so I'm just going to go and separate those as their own objects. And then I'm going to go through this whole gun one piece at a time and separate all the individual pieces that are basically going to be unwrapped in different ways. So for example, this part of the gun right here is going to be unwrapped like a cylinder. Then this is going to be unwrapped like a pyramid step. This will be unwrapped like a cylinder, and so on and so forth. So we're going to separate all of this stuff into different objects depending on how it's being unwrapped. So we'll start over here and select just the barrel of the gun. So I'm selecting the inside face there, inside the barrel. I'll use Control plus sign to select the geometry up till this point, and then separate that selection. This is easy to select. That's going to be another cylinder, and I'll go ahead and separate that as its own selection. I can link select this now because there's nothing on either side. Separate that as its own selection. We can do kind of the same thing over here. I can select this face right here and Control plus sign to select up to here. We're going to treat this like a pyramid step, so I'm going to separate that as its own selection. The rest is a little bit tricky, so what I want to do is mark some seams to make it a little bit easier to separate these things. So there's going to be a seam right here. I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And we need to separate this part around the trigger from the base of the gun. This is going to be a lot like as if we were separating a branch off a tree. So let me zoom in here and separate this as if it was a branch. And basically get those edges that are connecting the branch to the bigger branch. So those are the edges. Mark them as a seam. Same thing over here. Again, as if this was a tree and a branch. Just go in here and find the seams that need to be marked. Go ahead and mark those as seams. And we're going to need to do the same thing here to separate this as if it was a branch that came off of here. So same thing. And we're just about done here. Go ahead and select that, mark that as a seam. I think those are all the seams that we need. This bottom piece right here needs to have its own seam as well. Okay, let's start by selecting linked on here. We'll separate that. We'll select linked on this part right here and separate that. We'll select linked on this, and we also want to grab that along with it and then separate that as its own selection, leaving just this piece right here as the last object. And I'm not going to bother separating that as a selection because technically it is, right now it is its own selection. If I go back to object mode, you can see that this is now one solid piece, and each of these are now individual objects. One by one, we're going to go and unwrap these. I'm going to start by hiding stuff that we don't need to see. And let's zoom in and get started. I'm going to hide everything else. Go into edit mode. That loop back there is already selected, so I'm just going to select this loop along with it. And the bottom loop here. Notice I'm in bottom ortho. I'm going to do this very quickly. So, mark seam. Go over to the UV editing window. Now this would be a lot faster if I clean this up a little bit. So I'm just going to take a moment to clean up this these screens and eliminate all the stuff that I don't really need to use here. It's just kind of in the way. The only thing left is default and UV editing. That's going to make it easier. Now I can go back and forth using the control and left or right arrow keys. So with that done, I'm going to select all, go to the UV editing window, and unwrap this. I need to line up these edges so that everything is nice and clean checkerboard pattern. So let's turn the checkerboarding on first, and then go in here and start lining up these edges with WA. I think I'm going to turn the stretch tool on now so I don't forget to do it later. And just check this out, make sure there's no stretching. There is a little bit, but I can live with that. I think what I'm going to do is select all, scale it down a little bit. I'm going to move it to the upper left hand side, and we're just going to kind of go around the clock here and just place pieces. I'm going to start here, I'll put the next one here, and we'll just go around like this. Okay, so back to the default window, back to object mode, unhide everything, select the next object, hide everything else, zoom in. Very redundant. This one we're going to unwrap like a pyramid step. So I'm going to select all of these edges here because they're all symmetrically. Because we're going to unwrap all of this symmetrically. Then we're going to grab these two edges here and mark all of that as a seam. Over to the UV editing window, select all, unwrap. All we need to do is line these up. So all I'm going to do is turn the vertex snapping on real quick and snap together the ones that fit without rotating first. Leaving only the stuff that needs to be rotated. I'll turn the magnet off and rotate all this stuff and then turn the magnet back on. So these two are both in the same orientation. We're going to do the same thing over here. Rotate that 90 degrees, and those are going to be all set. And then this one should be rotated negative 90 degrees, and that's all set. Turn the magnet back on, and we're just going to snap everything into one central location. Now, you really should take the time to line up all of the vertices. So find a central point with all these vertices and snap all these vertices one by one all together. I'm not going to do that because I have to do this very quickly, and I'm not actually going to be putting a texture on this anyway. So once you're done, turn off your vertex snapping, and remember, we're going to be setting this up like this. So I'm just going to grab this and put it up here because I remember that the last one was there. And then let's move on to the next piece, which is this cylinder right here. Should be pretty easy. It's a basic cylinder. Find the bottom, mark that. Everything mark as seams. Go back over here, select all, and unwrap. Gonna need to line up these edges again. Sometimes it's good to see your checkerboard pattern as you do it. And let's go ahead and do this. Select all. I'm going to scale it down a little bit, grab it, put it over here. Move on. Next piece. Hide everything else. Zoom in. This can be done fairly quickly. It's redundant, but it's easy. It's kind of mindless once you've done this a few times. Mark seam. Back over here. Select all. Unwrap. So basically, turn the vertex snapping on and then grab all this stuff and put all the similar pieces together until you run out of options. Turn my magnet back on again and snap all this stuff together. Remember to turn your vertex snapping back off again, select all, and I'm going to grab all this and put it over here. Now, I already know that it's going to be fine, but if you want, you can always go and check the checkerboard pattern. Let's go on, move on to the next object, which is this. However, I'm going to save that piece for last. Let's move over to this one next. And again, this one's already marked. So just go around and mark all of these edges. We're going to treat this like a pyramid step. Mark seam, go over to our UV editing window, select all, unwrap. Let's select all of this, turn on our UV grid, and I'm just going to snap all these together real quick. Okay, I see a problem with this, and before I continue, I need to fix something. So what it is, I left all these triangles. You can see all these triangles here. So all I need to do is unmark these, or clear these seams rather, and it's real easy to do, and then select all and unwrap this again. Now everything should be fine. Remember to turn this off, and I'm going to line these up so they're kind of together. Again, I Can't stress this enough. Go and line up these vertices if you want to paint nice, clean seams around all this stuff, or maybe grout or whatever it is that you want to do. Anything that happens along these edges, you want to make sure that all these edges line up perfectly. I'm not doing it because I have to do this very quickly. Just move that over here. And okay, where are we at? We can do this piece next. This piece I'm going to do a little bit differently. So basically, the first time I tried to unwrap this, I put a seam here like this. I marked that as a seam. I came over here and I was thinking that was all I would need to do to unwrap this. So when I did this, it looked like this. I probably could live with this, honestly, but I found another way to go about doing this too. So if you're happy with this and this is good enough for you, then just move on. But I wasn't happy with this. I thought I could do a little bit better job. So this is what I came up with. I got rid of this seam and I decided to mark all of these and treat it like a cardboard box instead. But there is no front face. So that's the weird thing about this. It's going to be 4 islands and nothing connecting any of this stuff together. And go ahead and mark all of those as a seam. Select all and unwrap. You end up with all these different islands like this. So that's what you end up with, and maybe you could make this work a little bit better by possibly rotating this around like this and using up this texture space a little bit more efficiently like this maybe. To make use of this space a little bit better, you might get creative with it or something like this. Another thing you can do to save space is turn these into right angles. That might be a little bit more conservative. So I'll probably do something like that, and I'd paint on that. It would look okay. So either method is fine. I think what I'm going to do is use this method because it's different than anything else that I've done in this course, and I just kind of wanted to show you another way you could go about doing something. Now you have these seams everywhere, but I imagine you're probably just going to put a highlighted edge there anyway. So I think it'll look fine with a basic, like a dark black slate gray texture on it with a little bit of noise and a highlighted edge there. I think it'll be fine. And if it doesn't work out, you could always go back to the other thing. So let's move on to the next piece. And so we have this and this, but let's go ahead and do this one next. Okay, so this one, we already have a seam marked down here, and I'm thinking I want to split it down the middle like this. That's the idea, and it's on the inside. That seems to make the most sense. However, I have a feeling this is not going to unwrap that well, so I'm going to probably throw another seam along the back as well. But let's start by putting a seam there just to see what happens. So select all and unwrap. I want to put the checkerboard pattern on here so I can kind of look at things. And actually, here's our seam, so I expect things to get a little groovy here, but everything else, it's kind of all right. There's a little bit of stretching. So let's go back over here and move on. So what do we got here? Let's take a look at this with texture. And apparently I forgot to texture this one, so I'm just going to go take care of that real quick. Okay, so now we can see that with the texture on it. So the only thing left is this piece right here. I'm going to hide everything else. Go into edit mode. And what's funny is I've been worried about this since the beginning, but I have a feeling this might be very easy to unwrap. So a couple of seams right there. Let's go ahead and mark that. Select all and unwrap. And look at that. Actually unwrapped even better than the last piece. So this is actually the first time I unwrapped this piece. I was a little worried about it, but it turns out there was nothing to worry about. And let's go ahead and take a look at this with the checkerboard pattern on there. Actually, it looks fantastic. So that's that. We're done with this. Let's go ahead and unhide everything and show textures. We're not quite done yet. The next step is we need to balance out all of the checkerboard patterns so that they're all exactly the same size, or very close anyway, and then line up our texture atlas, and then we'll be done. This is going to be very easy to do. All we need to do is select all, join all this stuff together, and go back to the UV editing window, Go into edit mode, select all. Now, I got organized in the beginning and I started lining all this stuff up, but then I forgot about it, and so we have a bunch of mixed up stuff in the middle. So that's not a big deal. I know that this stuff is lined up, so I'm just going to work backwards and select this and grab that, move it down here. This was the second to last thing I did, so I'm just going to grab that, move it over here. And then we did this previous to that. Now this is kind of different because we broke it up into 4 different islands. And actually I kind of don't like this. I think I might do this. I might actually clear those seams and put it back the way it was originally. So let's go ahead and unwrap that again. And even though it looks a little stretched, I kind of like this a little bit better. So I'm going to go with that. Okay, so there's the bottom piece. I'm not sure where that goes, but we'll just put it here for now. And finally, let's select all and go to average island scale. That will set up all of the checkerboarding so that everything is perfectly aligned. And it kept the location of everything, but everything has been rescaled. So some of this stuff is now, you know, on top of each other. You see this sometimes. So anytime you use that tool, it's a good idea to separate all this stuff afterwards. There's no way all this stuff is going to fit inside there, so I'm going to select all and scale it down. Grab it and start moving things around. I think maybe somewhere around here. Now some of this stuff is stacked islands, like all this stuff right here, and all of this stuff here is all stacked. So you got to be careful about some of that stuff. But a lot of the stuff is not stacked. And I think what I'm going to do is just put all the stacked stuff in one little area outside here. So all the stuff here is stacked, just to make it easier to select. This is that piece over there. I think I'll figure out a way to squeeze that in there. There's actually plenty of room here. I'm going to end up with extra space. So I'm not going to worry too much about the rest of this. Just kind of put it all together. There's something like that. Now you could probably, if you want to use up the rest of the space, what you could do is select all, scale this up, and continue making it fit until you don't have any space left over. But since I'm out of time, I'm just going to go with what I got there, and that will conclude this object. We're done unwrapping our gun. We've got everything all set up in a texture atlas. You got the general idea here, so now you're ready to actually apply some textures to this. So go ahead and do that, and if you want to share your work, please use the discussions for this lecture and show people what you did. I'll leave you some feedback. I'm sure other students will as well, and just have fun with it. In the next lecture, we're going to be unwrapping a tank. We're going to start by fixing all the problems first, and I'm pretty sure there's quite a few problems with the tank. I think the tank's probably going to take a lot longer than these other objects. I have a feeling it's going to be the most difficult piece. But I have no idea how long that's going to take, but we'll get it. One piece at a time, we'll unwrap that thing. And so the best advice I can give you is to go into the tank tutorial, download the tank file, and try to fix all the problems before you watch the lecture. Just as I've been saying this all along, do the exercise first, go in and watch the lecture, and then compare notes, okay? So good luck, and I'll see you in the next section.